Salute, 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 man. This is Boxing Nocturnal Thoughts. So, listen, if I only watched Errol Spence versus Sean Porter and Terrence Bud Crawford versus Sean Porter, the only conclusion I would be able to come to, even though the triangle theory doesn't work, the only logical conclusion I would be able to come to, if those were the only fights I could use, I would say Terrence Bud Crawford would beat Errol Spence. He looked more impressive against Sean Porter. I just watched those fights last night. I watched Pool Counter Boxing. I watched his platform, his live. I watched the Mac Mob, his panel, his live. Bernie the Boxer. And then I watched Sean Porter versus Terrence Bud Crawford, and then right after that I had to watch Errol Spence versus Sean Porter. You know what I'm saying? And it's like Sean Porter says, man, he can't be used as a measuring stick. Styles make fights. They're not gonna fight each other the same way they fought me. Neither one of them fight like me. That's just what Sean Porter says. But at the end of the day, if I didn't know anything about Errol Spence and I didn't know anything about Terrence Bud Crawford, and I just watched both of those guys fight Sean Porter, I feel like naturally when you look at Terrence Bud Crawford, because of his ability to fight on the back foot, the way he was able to dictate, use a little bit more ring generalship, his pivot game was phenomenal. His back foot game was phenomenal. His counter, his catch and shoot, his check hooks, it was a lot more impressive. He was sharp. You know what I'm saying? He was real sharp. He was real instinctive, and he basically let Sean Porter defeat himself with how reckless he would be at certain spots. Now, Sean Porter, you can argue he had 1 foot in and 1 foot out. You can argue that between him and Kenny Porter, he didn't train like Kenny Porter wanted him to train. Kenny Porter said he had it in his mind already that he was going to throw in the towel. You can go on and on and on with that theory, and some of it is just plain fact. But at the end of the day, when I watched that fight, Sean Porter, even though I don't think Sean Porter was at the level mentally and physically that he was when he fought Errol Spence, he still was at an elite level. He still, with Sean Porter, it's still little things that he did that I was just disappointed in, where you could see that Sean Porter, I don't want to, you can't even label it, but he would take his foot off the gas. He would just do certain things. You know what I'm saying? He just, the killer instinct, the killer mode was not activated, but he still was hitting Terrence Bud Crawford with some shots. He still was doing some footwork that would cause that would cause Errol Spence problems in the Errol Spence fight. Terrence Bud Crawford looked strong. He looked just as big, if not bigger, than Sean Porter. He was manhandling him. There was some headbutts. Sean Porter, like I said, little things he would do. He was a lot more apologetic. Like, I never seen Sean Porter be apologetic for a headbutt. Like, when he busted down Andre Berto, he was like, man, you just got to be man enough to take what I give you. When he fought Terrence Bud Crawford, there was a lot more, man, my fault, that wasn't intentional, my fault for the headbutt. It was pats on the back. There was a lot of things Sean Porter was doing that I know his mentality wasn't the same when he fought Errol Spence. You know what I'm saying? Be that as it may. But Terrence Bud Crawford was phenomenal against Sean Porter. That was a great performance he had against Sean Porter. Now, we just know Terrence Bud Crawford did an interview where he did say, the reporter tried to say, what do you, when people come to this assessment that Errol Spence doesn't make adjustments and he's one-dimensional, Terrence Bud Crawford, to me, said the smartest thing, where he was like, he did make adjustments and take matters into his own hands to do what he had to do to get the victory. If he would have said anything else, I would have thought that he was underestimating his opponent and this was going to be easy work. At least to me, that looked like Terrence Bud Crawford is taking this fight as serious as he needs to, and he's looking at Errol Spence not the same way that, Bo Mack was like, oh, he just got stronger. Terrence Bud Crawford, I think, if he's looking at Errol Spence the proper way, he's going to train on the elite level. And that's what I want to see. You know what I'm saying? The best fighting the best. Nobody taking anybody for granted or overlooking somebody's skills and things of that nature. But back to what I was saying. Even though Sean Porter wasn't on that, same level of intensity that he was against Spence, he was still at a high level. You know what I'm saying? Just take it down a few notches, but he hit Terrence Crawford with some shit, and he never really hurt Terrence Bud Crawford. He stunned him a few times. He shook him and knocked him back, and he made Terrence Bud Crawford make adjustments, but he never really hurt Terrence Bud Crawford. Not the way that Agitas Kavalauskas and Gamboa, and he never stunned him and made his body betray itself. He never did that, but he did hit him and rock him a couple times. Now, he fought Errol Spence. He rocked Errol Spence a little bit more consistently. You know what I'm saying? Now, Errol Spence, when I watched that fight again, first of all, I gotta say this. If I don't say anything else, like I said, when you look at it with a naked eye and you just see the two fights and you kind of hypothesize a third fight, you just like Terrence Bud Crawford is easy. But when you look at Errol Spence in that fight, that was the worst version of Errol Spence really that I seen physically and mentally, and that was before the accident. You know what I'm saying? People always say, Sean Porter, you got Errol Spence before the accident. I think that Errol Spence, through his own admission, was talking about his regression as far as he had been trained and dedicated so much of his time. And once he became a champion and beat Kell Brook, he sort of started to, leave some stones unturned. He started to, basically, we know what you know what he did, but you could see it. You could see it in the Sean Porter fight on the scales, and really you could see it when you watch the fight over. Errol Spence looked puny. He looked, he was in decent shape, but he looked at Sean Porter like, I'm too much for Sean Porter. I can afford to not do strength and conditioning. I can afford not to eat the proper way. I can afford to not train as hard. And it showed big time. Not big time. To me, big time, but to most people, they may not have seen it. But I can tell you, like, when you watch that fight, usually you can see once the fighter starts to get loosened up and the blood start pumping and the adrenaline start pumping and they look different. Like they body start to show. Like Errol Spence's body was type of, when he was in shape, his body like Josh Taylor used to look. His body would start getting stronger as the rounds would go, but you could physically see it. You could see you could see when the blood, everything flowing and the adrenaline wear off and your blood flowing, you get loose. You can see their body just turn into the machine that it is. Errol Spence looks so dry. You look at the first round between him and Sean Porter, Errol Spence looked so dry. Like he didn't even have the ability to really break a sweat. Then he just looked so flat. Like the volume of his muscle fibers, he really had no vascularity, and his back looked so weak and thin. It didn't look the same. It just looked like he had did a diet that left his body a little bit lacking in nutrition, and when he tried to rehydrate, it just didn't have it there. The next day he probably woke up and felt stronger, but that day he was not on point. He was not on target, and it showed in the ring, and Shawn Porter did his best to take advantage, and he still came up short, and that says a lot. But Errol Spence, he didn't look good against Shawn Porter. Still, in certain ways, he did get off a lot of good shots on Shawn Porter, but I just look at Errol Spence, and when he's in shape, and now that he has a nutritionist and this, that, and the third, I'm just saying if he was in better shape, if he was in the same shape he was when he fought like against your Danish Ugas, that Errol Spence landing those same shots that he landed, because he hit Shawn Porter with a lot of fucking shots, crazy. But I just think just him not being in the proper conditioning and strength that he usually would be, those shots didn't have the same effect, you know. And I think if he was in the better shape that he usually, and he had the ability to come in, if he didn't get lazy, if he didn't stop doing the strength and conditioning as much, if he didn't eat and give his body the proper nutrients as he should, if he would have did those things then, I think it would have been a different fight with him and Shawn Porter. I think he really would have hurt Shawn Porter with some of those shots he was landing. They would have had more impact. But at the end of the day, if you don't look into all those different little factors and go down the rabbit holes and conspiracy theories, and oh, he didn't train, and oh, you know, he didn't have a nutritionist, and oh, Shawn Porter didn't train for the Terrence Bud Crawford fight. He was about to retire. And if you look at Terrence Bud Crawford and say, whatever little things you can conjure up, if you wipe the slate clean of all that and you just look at the fights, Terrence Bud Crawford looked better against Shawn Porter. So, you know, I don't like to bank on that shit. That's why you can't use it as a measuring stick. You gotta I look at all the fights as possible as Terrence Bud Crawford, when he looked the most dominant. To me, he looked like, because neither one of Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence has looked as dominant to me, like as a Floyd Mayweather against Arturo Gatti, or Floyd Mayweather against Diego Corrales. They never looked they was just so untouchable. You can't hit me, I'm gonna hit you, and when I do hit you, I'm gonna hurt you, I'm gonna bust you up, and I'm gonna knock you out, and I'm gonna come out so clean and don't even get touched. That's how Mayweather used to be. I never seen Terrence Bud Crawford really go through a fight and dance on the water and not get wet and just break somebody down that systematically, where he's just completely dominated like that. He usually gets touched. The closest and I haven't seen every single one of his fights, but the closest I've seen to him just really dominate somebody where I said, man, it's just a total mismatch, was probably against Victor Postal recently. I'm like, Victor Postal didn't have nothing for Terrence Bud Crawford. But Agitas Kavalauskas kind of touched him. Hank Lundy, the first round, kind of touched him. Gamboa touched him. Significantly too. I mean, where it was like a little back and forth fight until Terrence Bud Crawford would make the adjustments, and then he would just dominate him. But other than that, he was in tough little scuffles, but he would just outclass these guys and beat them up and break them down. And then some of his fighters and opponents just wasn't worth mentioning. Amir Khan and Kell Brooks, when he fought Kell Brooks, it just ain't really worth mentioning. And you look at Errol Spence, you can look at Errol Spence and see, flaws in his guys he fought with, the Kell Brooks and Lamont Petersons and et cetera, but the most I seen him just look like a Mayweather type of a untouchable and a monster that just seeking destroys. I would say against Chris Van Heerden, he looked like a next level, and against Lamont Peterson, he looked next level. And then, he dominated Mike Garcia, he dominated Danny Garcia, but if you really break those fights down just a little bit more, you can see where Errol Spence would get caught here and there, touched here and there. Nothing crazy, nothing that just is completely glaring. That's why people keep focusing on this Yordenis Ugas 6th round. That was probably the most glaring I've seen him get hurt, with the mouthpiece flying out, then getting caught with the 2 pieces, then going into the ropes. That kind of is more glaring. You can say, those mistakes he can't make against Terrence Bud Crawford. Really, a lot of mistakes he made against Yordenis Ugas, I don't think he can make against Terrence Bud Crawford. He can't afford those holes in his game. He has to close them and tighten it up. But at the same time, you can look at Terrence Bud Crawford and see him getting dropped by the Agitas Kavalauskas, see him getting clipped in a couple of fights, but you can't even gauge that and say, oh, that's what's going to happen with Errol Spence. He's going to make the adjustments. He's going to tighten up. There's going to be 2 styles that neither of the guys have really faced. Errol Spence has never faced Terrence Bud Crawford. Terrence Bud Crawford has never faced Errol Spence. And it's going to be a great fight, a showdown. I think it might be something different than what some people expect. It might even, after the fight, leave more questions than answers. You know what I'm saying? To be honest with you, we just have to wait and see. At least it's getting closer to that fight coming into manifestation, and start talking about dates, and it's really starting to get to the point where this fight is going to come together. So that's great. That's all I can say. That's just great. Past that, it's just boxing, and I still lean heavily on the Errol Spence side because I expect him to be in better shape than he was against Jordanis Ugas. I expect him to be more sharp, quicker, better defense, mentality a little bit more, you know what I'm saying, intense and stronger. And I just expect to see the best version of Errol Spence. And I do believe that the best version of Errol Spence, from what I saw and have seen, beats the best version of Terrence Bud Crawford. But that version of Errol Spence that showed up against Sean Porter, Terrence Bud Crawford would beat that guy. And the Errol Spence that showed up against Jordanis Ugas, Terrence Bud Crawford, who showed up to fight Sean Porter, could possibly upset that guy too. So Errol Spence will have to be sharper, bigger, stronger, faster, better ring IQ and tighten up his defense, and listen to Derrick James and make the adjustments. And this is pretty much exactly what I expect to see. A better version of Errol Spence that we haven't seen, because Terrence Bud Crawford is going to bring that out of him. And past that point, we just have to see what happens. This video stretched out way longer than I wanted to, but it is what it is. I appreciate y'all for rocking with me. Salute, salute, salute. Bow.